Welcome to IP Goes Pop, your source for exploring the interface between intellectual property and pop culture. The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com. This program should not be considered legal advice. Please consult an attorney for your specific situation. And now your host, intellectual property attorney, Michael Snyder.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome again to another episode of the podcast IP Goes Pop, the podcast that asks the question, and sometimes it's a musical question, where do patents come from and how come I hear people talk about them in movies and television, and what are trademarks and how come I see them on TV and I see articles written about them? This week, IP Goes Pop puts its proverbial finger in the proverbial electrical socket as we talk about the competition, sometimes friendly, sometimes very competitive competition between Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla relating to electrical currents and their various inventions of electrical currents. Now, joining me today, I'm very excited to have my fellow shareholder, Wes McMichael. Wes, hello and welcome.
Hi, Mike. It's an honor to be here.
I don't know if it's an honor to be here, but we're very excited to have you because you are part of the electrical patent group at Volpe Koenig. And we have a lot of electrical discussion today. I think it'll be electrical in both the subject matter and the actual discussion itself will light up the podcast waves, if you will. So just a reminder and a disclaimer that this is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, please consult an attorney. And with that being said, away we go on this episode of IP Goes Pop as we electrify this podcast. I'm working in so many electricity puns already. I hope I have some left for the end. Setting the table a bit, let's talk about our first main character. Our first main character this week is Thomas Alva Edison, born in February 11th, 1847 in Ohio. Thomas Edison is an inventor that is very well known. He's really part of the culture. I don't think just the American culture. I think this is an inventor that was so prolific and had a part in, first of all, the time in history when he invented. He had a hand in so many inventions that directly related to pop culture and how things in pop culture are delivered, movies and music, sound, light, electricity. So Thomas Edison, and by the way, also, sometime during this period after 1847, of course, the wave of children having the middle name Alva, I think is something people don't talk about enough. We're not going to touch on that on this podcast, but I just wanted to point that out. I have no historical backup for that, by the way. So Edison was called the Wizard of Menlo Park. So shout out to New Jersey, where we do have an office. And he had a Menlo Park laboratory. Wes, I don't know if you got a chance to look into, what was going on in his Menlo Park laboratory or why, in fact, he was called the Wizard of Menlo Park.
Well, I think his first big breakout invention was the phonograph, and that was like just out of nowhere. There were lots of people working on lights and electricity, but the phonograph was just really blew people away, and I think that came out of his Menlo Park laboratory.
And I think this was a very, I think there was pressure from him, who became kind of a public figure of inventing, and why else would you call someone a wizard? Which, by the way, interesting thing, we're going to get to the pop culture side of things as well, but in one of the recent movies about the battle over the electrical current, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, who also plays the wizard in the Avengers, in the Marvel Universe, Doctor Strange, I don't think there's a direct connection, but he's certainly a wizard-related actor. But they really had a culture of invention. They had people set out, literally, hundreds of people hired just to invent things. And out of that pretty high pressure environment came these things like, Wes, like you said, the phonograph. He also, the motion picture projector, one of the inventions. And again, specifically to you and your specialty, let's talk about one of his most famous patents.
Probably the light bulb. Is that what you're thinking, Mike?
That is actually, there was a light bulb over my head when I threw the question to you.
Yeah, as I said, there was electric light before Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. One of the existing technologies that was out there for electric lights before Thomas Edison was the arc lighting, and this was basically sending electricity to arc between two pieces of carbon, and you would get a very bright, intense, almost looks like probably like a welder's arc, and that would light up a pretty good bit of outdoor space. You wouldn't want to use it indoors because it wasn't contained in anything, and it was, if something more attractive came to that arc, it would jump to that, and if you put your hand in it, you would, burn yourself. So it was not a good technology for scaling. It worked for, maybe it was more safe than gas lights in cities and things like that, but it wasn't a real stable piece of technology. And so Thomas Edison knew if electric lights were going to take off, it needed to be a safe, low cost device that could be inside people's houses, and that's what led him to the incandescent light bulb patent, which he's so famous for, and he's known universally as the man who invented the light bulb. And as a patent attorney, I think that's always kind of interesting because if if you get into the world of patents, you know that there's so many people involved and so many patents involved in any kind of breakthrough technology. But for Thomas Edison, he filed the patent for the electric incandescent light bulb, and that was pretty profound at the time.
So the actual patent number is 223898, the electric lamp. We're going to post a link to that on our show notes for the podcast. So clearly, we've established kind of the historic basis for Thomas Edison and, some of the reasons why he was so famous. So we turn now to our second main character in this play of electrical currents. It's Nikola Tesla, born July 10, 1856 in Croatia, came to America to find his inventor fame. Tesla was an interesting character, both in the way he acted, in the way he dressed. The stories are that he had a certain way of dressing that he was very much into. He had what's called an eidetic memory, in which case he would remember things in 3 dimensions and could manipulate things in 3 dimensions. Very precise. He had very precise recall, and he could manipulate things in his mind. So he would often invent just in his head, and he would turn the objects in 3D in his head. Tesla, you may see images of him, or when they talk about Tesla, not the car brand that has taken his name, but when they talk about him, you'll see these large towers with, like arcing electricity coming off of them, or he may be surrounded by them. But Wes, tell us a little bit, any background at all on Tesla, to bring us into the next part of our conversation.
Sure. Well, one interesting fact he talked about, the day he was born, he was actually born during a lightning storm.
Yeah, you cannot plan something like that.
No, not with the life that this guy had afterwards. And he was commonly depicted in front of, kind of those like arc globes of that look like lightning in a ball, and he did that to attract investors, to make him look like he was a magician basically with electricity. So it's kind of the lightning storm is sort of a funny anecdote, but interesting when you look at the life that he had. And so so he worked for Edison in France actually for a while, but he didn't get along with, I would say, kind of corporate life. And there's a lot of different stories out there about why he left. But the one that I thought was the most interesting was that he, at some point, one of his managers, or maybe Edison, it wasn't clear, but made a joke and said, I need, 24 new inventions from each of you, and you get a $50,000 bonus. And Tesla turned in his 24 new inventions, which I'm sure were absolutely brilliant, and they kind of laughed at him and said, oh, you don't get American humor. So anyway, at some point he got fed up and moved over to New York and tried to pursue his new passion, which had become alternating current, and we'll get to that in a bit, I'm sure.
I know that, of course, two, giants of the world of inventions were sure to butt heads at some point. And I know that at least some of it was not shockingly, about money. I'm sure a lot of it was about perhaps Edison always had, historically, it's pretty well documented. He had a drive to have his name on things, to be in charge of things, to get the press for any advances that came out of Menlo Park or his other kind of invention incubators that he might have. So there was certainly some of the ego was likely involved as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely there's tons of stories of his ego and just I think kind of the classic way I always identify a true inventor or engineer is somebody that's just motivated by cool stuff and discovery and not necessarily money. And I think that's a good defining line between Tesla and Edison. That Edison was a businessman first and an inventor because that suited his business needs. But I think Tesla just wanted to work on cool stuff and prove things were possible that he imagined in his head.
And I think that gets into the portrayals in pop culture of the different characters and, those types of their personalities. I wanted to talk about a few, if people are interested. There are some really excellent movies that have come out recently. One is The Current War from 2017. In that one, Benedict Cumberbatch plays Edison. Nicholas Holt plays Tesla. You may know him from as is playing the Beast in some of the X-Men movies, so another scientist. Not that he's going to get typecast. And then Michael Shannon plays George Westinghouse, who Westinghouse was, we're going to talk about it, he was aligned in some ways with Tesla as trying to get electrical current or get the contracts for electrical current out to the people. So that's The Current War. It definitely focuses on the back and forth between the two men and kind of the war for, the battle for who would get the rights. And at the end, it is business. So who would get the rights to kind of light up the streets of the country at a certain point? And as you can imagine, how much business that would be to supply the electricity, going across the country. The next movie is Tesla. It's a 2020 film. In that one, Ethan Hawke plays Tesla. It's a little more intense. Kyle MacLachlan plays Edison. And actually, comedian Jim Gaffigan, plays George Westinghouse in some interesting casting. That one gets really into the head of Tesla, who, as Wes kind of said, he was a thinker and he was someone who invented just for the sake of it and almost wanted to. I think a lot of his business partners, including Edison, wanted to stop him from giving away his inventions. He felt that electricity was kind of this natural occurrence that should be free to all in some ways. He also did a lot of experiments which I think hurt his health as far as sitting and getting zapped by some of his devices.
Yeah, you wonder whether that had an effect on his personality throughout the later years of his life. All the electrocutions he'd had.
Yeah, no, they do talk about it, and there's articles about, wondering how that affected him in some of his decision making. And then the next movie of interest, it's The Prestige from 2006. Now, it's not a historical movie like the other movies. It's actually a movie about two competing magicians, Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman. It is a good movie. This is a spoiler-free commentary here, but David Bowie actually plays Tesla in a really fun and interesting performance. And Tesla's invention plays a very big part, again, no spoilers, in this competition between the two magicians. I'll leave it at that. It's a fun movie. Go watch it. Sure, there's a lot of fans of all three, Christian Bale, Hugh Jackman, and David Bowie. And, in school, you learn as a young child, Thomas Edison and the light bulb, or someone will almost always do a project on Thomas Edison and talk about all his inventions. Well, in the animated TV show, Bob's Burgers, the episode's called Topsy, and it's actually about what we're going to discuss as our topic today, because it does talk about things that Thomas Edison did to try to prove that his electrical current was the better one. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later too. So let's now turn to we've set the table nicely here. Let's now turn to the battle of the currents. And I bring you back to the late 1800s. And we need to talk about the two competing electrical currents, which are DC and AC. And Wes, I'm going to use your expertise here. Tell us a little bit about each one of the currents, maybe some drawbacks, the problems, the issues, and what the competition really was here.
Sure. So there were, two big horses in this race. It was direct current DC and alternating current AC. It's almost as simple as they're named, right? Direct current. I'm going to send, electrons down a wire, and they're going to flow down the wire till they get to some resistance, which could be a light bulb, it could be an electric motor, it could be, it could be anything. Could be, yeah, pretty much a motor, or electron, or a light bulb. So when electricity flows in direct current down a wire, the wire still has its own resistance, so the voltage slowly drops over the run of the wire. So what that meant is that it was limited as to how far it could transmit. Direct current is very steady. We'll come back to sort of the advantages in a minute, but so I want to talk about alternating current as well. So alternating current, this was Tesla's vision, that alternating current was really the way to do this. So Thomas Edison was really focused on developing electric lighting systems using direct current, and Nikola Tesla wanted to use this concept of alternating current, which was really, there were other people working on alternating current, but it was really not understood nearly as well as direct current was at this time. So alternating current, if you want to think about the same wire, with a power source and a light bulb, and instead of sending the electrons down the wire, they're basically going to vibrate the electrons next to each other. So it's exactly like it sounds. It's alternating current. So at the first instance, the electrons have a positive charge, and they're, let's just say they're moving clockwise around the circuit. And in the next instant, they are negatively charged, and they're flowing backwards, so counterclockwise around the circuit. If you can envision this. So each time that electron passes through the light bulb filament, its voltage is coming up, and then it reaches a peak, and the light is brightest, and then the current switches because it's alternating current, and it goes the other way, and for a brief instant, that light bulb actually does go dark, and the electrons flow the other direction. And you probably have heard, we're a 60 hertz system in the United States. So we do use, spoiler alert, alternating current wins the current battle. But anyway, we have a 60 hertz system. That means that in every second, the current switches 60 times. So you're not going to be able to see it with your light at home, but that's happening in all your light bulbs at home. Every 60, they are blinking 60 times a second, and the human eye doesn't see that. But just kind of an interesting fact that they are, if you plot it out on a graph, you'd have direct current would have a straight line across of voltage, and if you plotted out alternating current, you'd have kind of a sine wave, where the voltage is going positive to minus to positive to minus to positive to minus 60 times a second. So that's my most basic explanation of alternating current. If I'm leaving something out, Mike, certainly.
No, that's good. I don't know if it's just me. Anytime someone says the human eye can't detect it, I'm now staring at my light trying to detect it. I can't, but I was trying for a minute I thought that was a challenge to see if I could. We talked about one of Edison's patents. Let's talk about Tesla's patent that is relevant here. It is the Tesla Dynamo electric machine. It's US patent number 390721. Again, we'll post a link to that. It's interesting to see these old-timey patents and to see the drawings from them. They're a part of history. I just do want to read the claim because when you hear the claim of this patent, it will match up to how Wes just described alternating current. It says the combination with an alternating current generator having independent energizing or field and independent induced or armature coils of an alternating current exciter having generated or induced coils corresponding to and connected with the energizing coils of the generator as set forth, which there's a lot to read. We're not going to read what's set forth, but again, you can see that it's switching. back and forth between two different things, producing the effect that Wes just described very well. So on the one side, we have Thomas Edison. He was the proponent of DC current, and he also had contracts. He had generators, which were DC generators, and he had contracts with various towns, cities, states to supply the electricity at this point. But Wes, as you said, so there's an issue with how far the direct current can travel. And my understanding was he needed a lot of repeating stations, along the way to get the current to where it needed to be.
Yes, that's right. So Edison, it was no surprise that he focused on the city right near Menlo Park, New York. And in order to send this current into homes, they needed to have a generating station every few blocks, basically. It was really, we couldn't even transmit it a mile, so you had to have a lot of generators. And at the time, there's references to in all kinds of places about the noise these generators would make and all that kind of thing. So it wasn't a real ideal. Sometimes people would shut them down at night, and then that would be the end of the generators. And so it was a very clunky solution in my mind. Edison obviously pushed it hard because he had the light bulb, and so he wanted to say, this is the right solution. In the alternative, the alternating current systems, they could transmit, at least 7 miles and sometimes further. With some later innovations, they figured out how to send the power even farther. But that was certainly made it a more attractive solution for rural towns. So when these two started getting out there, and Tesla's, his stuff was getting pushed by Westinghouse, which is another whole long story. But essentially, they were focused on more rural towns, and Edison was trying to clean up in the cities because that was the short transmission lines.
Yeah, and there's a lot at stake here, business wise, and also reputation wise, because Edison was seen as this iconic figure who was almost a magician, if you will, inventing things that then became part of the public consciousness. So I think there was also some publicity at stake, some ego at stake again, and aligning with Tesla was a competitor of Edison, which was Westinghouse. At the time, there was actually a George Westinghouse who found that he could create the generators according to the inventions of Tesla, and became, a business competitor, but also did want to supply something. Again, if you look at it, I mean, people were in the dark right before this. So it's a very real thing that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, George Westinghouse kind of made all his money with train brakes, and that was where, so he amassed his fortune and then decided to kind of roll it forward. He got into the electricity scene and found his way to Tesla because he was trying to get around Edison's patents. And so Westinghouse kind of paired up with Tesla. And I think, Tesla gets all the name, but without Westinghouse, Tesla never would have made it. Without Westinghouse funds and kind of support and legal support too, with Westinghouse's lawyers just fighting, day and night to avoid the Edison patents, and that was really essential for Tesla's system to get off the ground.
Now, just to bring in the intellectual property or the IP part of IP Goes Pop there. So Edison did a lot of patent filing, and patents are a right to exclude, meaning that you kind of had to get through this thicket of any patents that Edison and his companies laid down in order to practice the technology that you wanted to practice. So not only was he very good at publicity, but he was also good at working the system, the patent system that is, and may have laid the groundwork for companies today that really want the most patent coverage, in their technological area to make it, if someone is practicing in their area, they'll have to get through, the maze of patents as well. So he was one of the early adopters of that, of what kind of became part of the modern system. But Wes, this wasn't all, handshakes and mustache wax and fun and games. There was some negative publicity that Edison tried to throw at Westinghouse and Tesla to kind of shut it down before it even got started.
Yeah, well, so one of the things with alternating current is it's a much higher voltage. In some sense, that it can actually be safer, but that's sort of a debate. But Edison was really pushing the line that alternating current was dangerous, and there were one of the big differences in New York when they were rolling them out was that the alternating current lines were being put up above ground and they were detached through buildings. And you look at these pictures from this time period of New York, and there's wires running everywhere, and some of them are telegraph lines, and some of them are alternating current lines, and I'm sure there's other lines too. Some of them are probably clotheslines. So there were a couple incidents in New York where the alternating current lines, maintenance people were working on one really famous one was right in Midtown in the middle of the day, and one of the workers, fell off a ladder or something and grabbed onto the wires and got electrocuted hanging from a wire in the middle of a city day in New York. And Edison jumped on that, used his connections at the paper and all of that, and just publicized it, like crazy, and pushed it out into the media, and became this way that AC power is dangerous. And I think he had some success with that. So then he came up with the idea of, it's dangerous. I'm going to show you how dangerous it is. I'm going to electrocute this animal. And so, he started with electrocuting, dogs and things with this, and then decided he should do it bigger. And he eventually did a horse. He would bring the media in for this public display of how dangerous alternating current is, and he would electrocute something. And it was very startling to people that watched it. And there's sort of two things. We'll eventually go to another invention that led to with Edison, but first, I think you referenced Topsy the elephant.
Yes, from Bob's Burger episode.
Yeah, is this a good time to talk about Topsy?
This is exactly the time.
Okay, so
by the way, not that this. Look, I do want to say this story does take a dark turn.
Yeah,
not our fault. It's Edison's fault, but it does take a dark turn. But yes, this is the time to discuss Topsy the elephant.
So the legend goes that, along the same lines of these smaller animals that Edison was electrocuting, he decided to prove he could electrocute the biggest animal he could find, which was an elephant. And so enter Topsy, who was a circus elephant. And I think, doing a little bit more research into it, and this was the one that the girl on Bob's Burgers was going to replicate for her science project. But it turns out that the Topsy electrocution was kind of after the current wars had been resolved. I think it was 1903, and basically Topsy was a abused elephant that was sick, and so the organization that organized this was trying to find a humane way to put down Topsy, and so they called up Edison, and he did send a camera crew, and you can find videos of it on YouTube.
Wow, I am not going to look for that. I'll tell you that right now. We will not have a link to that on the show notes.
I mean, it's amazing that this. Yeah, it's amazing that this is. You can find this. It was 1903, and here it is on YouTube. But that's
amazing.
And anyway, they found that was the most humane way to put down an elephant. And there was also some kind of injection they gave him too. So they tried a couple different things all at once to really make sure that this elephant didn't suffer. So maybe not as dark as the legend goes of Edison was trying to prove he was the best in electrocuted an elephant.
Yeah, well, I have to say, if you can't trust a Sunday night animated cartoon for historical references, I don't know who you can trust. So Bob's Burgers, I'm looking at you. You have to set the record straight, perhaps in a later episode. I did ultimately we talked about the fact that the AC current prevailed, but there was yet a kind of third twist in the story where at the end of the day, Edison, I believe it all ended up with Edison being part of General Electric, and he was part of it at the end of the day as well, I believe.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's not often talked about, but JP Morgan was really the kind of puppet master in the whole background. But, I think that Westinghouse and Tesla kind of realized they weren't going to overcome the light bulb situation. And And I think Edison somewhat realized that, maybe deep down he recognized that AC was more scalable and, had a better chance of really, what they all wanted was lighting up the world. And so, yeah, eventually kind of merger was agreed to, and unfortunately, I think it was the end of Edison in charge of the Edison Corporation, but which, as you said, became General Electric, and Edison was sort of pushed out of there. But eventually, the two sides realized he's got the best light bulb, we've got the best AC power system, so let's take the best and make it work. And I think that's that's maybe like an early sign of all the communications networks and things like that we had to go forward, where companies actually come together and work on them, and share each other's patents and license things to each other and that sort of thing. So
I do want to say, if your name is JP Morgan, the chance of you being a puppet master is very high.
no doubt he had his hand in a lot of stuff.
He did. He did. Actually, he may come up again in some of our other historical IP Goes Pop stories. I think we would be remiss if we didn't just mention Tesla. And this may be for an entire other episode when we talk about wireless, but Tesla also was one of the early inventors who was really thinking about wireless transmission.
Yeah, that's true. He was helping, once he kind of paired up with JP Morgan, he was sort of helping with the transatlantic radio, but he sort of then envisioned this, like he does. He has this, vision in his head of a instant communication system that would kind of gather stock quotes and telegram messages and funnel them from a central point out to these, handheld devices, or he said broadcasted to a device that would fit in your hand. So early on, he was, he knew about the iPhone way before anybody. And, he worked on it, but never got enough. I think he saw he could work on these things, and he tried to pursue them in his own lab, and he wanted to, but they were so far from being implemented that the business people that were funding him kind of discourage him from working on it, because they're like, that's too crazy. You're never going to finish that in your lifetime, and we'll never get it out.
Yeah, there's a quote about, something about technology. When you first see any new technology that's so far ahead, it almost appears to be magic. And I think he suffered from having it in his head and knowing, it was the future, but no way to kind of express it or to convince people at the time. But when you see these images of Tesla surrounded by these towers with these, spheres on the top with electricity just shooting out he would just sit in the middle and think and contemplate with all that around. So if you're an investor walking into that scene, I could see why you're not going to write a check right away for his wireless invention. And I think that, the history played out that way. But Wes, you've been fascinating. Thank you so much. I cannot wait to have you back on the podcast. Any final thoughts?
No, well, I think, Mike, if you, if you look at this and compare these two to sort of, modern day equivalents, you might have a Steve Jobs and a Bill Gates, and Steve Jobs was kind of the crazy visionary, and if he could imagine it, he could work and get it implemented. And he's had periods, when Apple came out and everything was so high and he was riding high, and then Apple kind of went away, and and then he didn't give up, and he came back out with the iPod, and it was totally different, and then the iPhone, and meanwhile, Bill Gates was sort of just slow and steady, and
on every operating system in the world.
Right, exactly. So he's much more of like the Edison, and sort of just poking along, working on practical things that people needed, and things that could be implemented and monetized quickly. And so it's kind of an interesting comparison to look at those two, where I don't think, Steve Jobs' goal didn't, I mean, obviously everybody wants to make money, but I think Steve Jobs just wanted to really change the world, and I think Bill Gates, and no doubt he wanted to change the world, but he also wanted to get rich when he started making computers.
Well, I want to urge people on the pop culture side, check out The Current War. It's a really interesting historical movie. Check out Tesla with Ethan Hawke, kind of goes inside the head of Tesla. Prestige, you could check out if you like movies about magicians, but you'll see David Bowie, which is nice. And then Bob's Burgers, I've kind of turned on them now from what Wes told me about the true history. But thanks again, Wes. Thank you, listener, for listening to IP Goes Pop. We'll see you again when we talk about movies, TVs, films, patents, trademarks, and copyrights. Thanks again. We'll see you soon on the podcast.
The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com.